Hello and welcome to another new episode of A Brief History Spooky Season. We've all played with a doll at one time or another in our lives, whether it be a Barbie, action figure, or a baby doll. And stories about dolls have been told for generations, from Toy Story to Child's Play to that one episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark that is still my favorite to this day. Today's story has been used in the Conjuring franchise and even got its own movie trilogy. But what really happened? This is a brief history of the Annabelle doll. As always, this episode of A Brief History may contain graphic content and is not suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Today, we are building a 1970s inspired apartment to tell the story behind the Annabelle doll. We've all seen the movies or promos for the Annabelle movies and recognize her as a large porcelain doll, complete with frizzy red hair, a cracked face, and eyes that seem to peer into the depths of your soul. But that's the Hollywood version of Annabelle. A doll created by a horror franchise to scare the viewer simply by looking at her. The real Annabelle is described best by science writer Sharon A. Hill, who said, like real-life Ed Warren, real-life Annabelle is actually far less impressive. The real Annabelle doll is simply a large Raggedy Ann doll, a fully plush rag doll with red yarn hair, a cute triangle nose, and her iconic blue smock dress. What was so different about this Raggedy Ann doll compared to the thousands of others that have been sold around the world? Lorraine Warren was quoted as saying, "Looks are deceiving. It's not what the doll looks like that makes it scary. It's what has been infused within the doll. Evil." The true story of Annabelle takes place in Hartford, Connecticut, where two student nurses lived in an apartment as roommates trying to make it through college. In 1970, one of the nurses was gifted a Raggedy Ann doll by her mother after she purchased it from a local thrift store. After moving the doll into the shared apartment, the two students noticed strange things starting to happen around the house. Like all of the Warrens' paranormal investigations, the weird activity started off innocently enough. The doll would be left in one spot at the beginning of the day, and the students would come home to find the doll in an entirely different location. They would leave at the beginning of the day with the doll's legs uncrossed, only to come home to find the doll with her legs crossed as though she was waiting for their return. Of course, following in line with other paranormal stories, the unexplained activity became more frequent and far more terrifying. Upon arriving home one evening, the nurses found paper scattered around the floors of the apartment with the words "Help me" scribbled onto the paper in crayon. The paper was made of parchment and unlike anything the women had kept in their apartment, leading them to become more fearful of the strange doll that had been gifted to them. Finally, one of the two nurses called on a psychic after the women claimed to have seen the doll's hands levitate while eating breakfast one morning. A psychic hired by the women arrived at the house and spared no time beginning a seance. The psychic claimed that she had been contacted by a young girl, around 8 years old, who was attempting to communicate through the doll. The psychic claimed that the young girl, who was named Annabelle, had been killed in a car accident just outside of the apartment, and had now taken possession of the doll. The students felt relieved and almost a bit excited, and began interacting more and more with the doll, treating her almost like a third roommate, until the doll began acting violently. The fiancé of one of the women stayed over and was sleeping on the couch in the apartment, with the doll sitting on the end of the couch. He woke in the middle of the night from a dream, terrified, claiming that he had a horrible nightmare that the doll had come to life and had began strangling him after crawling up his legs. In his sleep-deprived state, the fiancé threw the doll across the apartment and almost instantly felt a sharp pain across his torso. The man had slash marks appear out of nowhere on his chest and stomach. Both the women and the fiancé were now terrified and decided they needed more expert help and attempted to have a priest come look at the doll. The priest, on the other hand, referred the trio to the infamous Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens came in for their investigation and found that the real girl that the psychic claimed to have died outside the apartment had never existed in the first place. Instead, they believed that the doll had been taken over by a demonic entity who was trying to find an opening to possess one of the women in the apartment. The Warrens performed an exorcism on the doll and the apartment before taking the doll into their custody for safekeeping. The doll was then stored at the Warrens' Occult Museum. Scary story, huh? But unlike the other stories we've told on this channel, it has a seeming lack of intricate details. We don't know the names of the two women in the story, though the name Donna has been thrown around as one of the nurses. We don't know exactly where the apartment was. We don't know which thrift store the doll came from or who actually purchased the doll. Why, when we have full retellings of other stories like the Amityville house or the Snedeker house from the families themselves, do we not have any information coming from the women or the fiancé involved in the Annabelle story? Simple. The only retellings of the story of Annabelle have ever come directly from the Warrens. There is no proof that the Annabelle story happened or if it was just made up. Many people in the paranormal and skeptic community have come forward, claiming that the Warrens were just scam artists who capitalized on anything they could to make a quick buck. For the story of Annabelle, we simply have nothing to go on but what the Warrens have told us. What do you think? Did the Warrens capitalize on the trope of a doll coming to life to wreak havoc on people? Or is Annabelle truly possessed by a malevolent spirit? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining me for this episode of A Brief History Spooky Season. Thank you to my patrons who support this series. You are much appreciated. Don't forget to like and subscribe, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.